It's Tuesday, September 5th, 2017. I hope you all had a wonderful Labor Day. Our hearts go out to the people of Southeast Texas and Louisiana who have dealt with the effects of Hurricane Harvey this weekend, are still dealing with those effects. I want to begin today with Trump's latest sickening attack on immigrants. Today, he ordered, and here he is. Oh, I always forget my orange magic marker. Where is that? Because otherwise you wouldn't recognize this person. He ordered an end to the Obama-era executive action that shields young undocumented immigrants, often called dreamers, from deportation under what's been known as the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, or DACA. Now, you've got to understand that these kids, and there really are, unfortunately they have been and are under Trump, powerless. These kids came to the United States when they were infants. They're still, many of them, very, very young. They did nothing wrong. Most don't know any country other than the United States. They've been brought up here. The program has granted them 2-year work permits that can be renewed. It applies to about 800,000 people. At least 124,000 of them, not incidentally, live in Texas. Now, Trump today called the program an amnesty-first approach. Amnesty first, he said in a derogatory way. I mean, remember, this is a president who's now talking about corporate tax amnesty, but when he talks about amnesty for kids, this is something that he doesn't like. He urged Congress to replace it with legislation before the program begins phasing out under Trump's order on March 5th, 2018, next March. Now, Trump played out this announcement in his usual will he or won't he style of reality television. But there are real lives at stake here. His decision leaves, as I said, some 800,000 young people who were brought to the United States as children in complete legal limbo, without authorization. As to the uncertainty of their lives, imposes even more burden on their families that financially depend on them. Why did Donald Trump do this? What is the point, and why now? Hurricane ravaged Houston, Southeast Texas, Louisiana, contain a large number of undocumented immigrants, including many dreamers. They don't qualify for cash assistance from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, but they have become a vital part of their communities. One dreamer even gave his life trying to help those in need last week. Alonzo Guillen and his friends, they borrowed a boat to go look for survivors in the floodwaters of Houston. Guillen perished when their boat capsized during a rescue search. So again, Donald Trump, why now? In the midst of the chaos of Hurricane Harvey, did you choose to end the Dreamers program? Now, it is true, Trump promised during the 2016 campaign that he'd end the program, but he also made a promise to the Dreamers that he would keep it. Most Republicans, in fact, support letting Dreamers stay in the country legally. According to a recent poll, 2/3 of Republicans support outright citizenship for the Dreamers. In announcing the repeal of DACA today, Attorney General Jeff Sessions, now Jeff Sessions made the announcement. Notice that Donald Trump didn't. Jeff Sessions, he cited one of the Trump administration's most vile lies about immigrants. He claimed that the program denied jobs to hundreds of thousands of Americans by allowing those same illegal aliens to take those jobs. That is absolute rubbish. Immigrants strengthen the workforce. They add to demand, which creates more jobs for everyone. There is not one slight iota of evidence, piece of evidence, that the Dreamers actually took away jobs from anybody born in the United States. According to the Center for American Progress, ending DACA, this Dreamers program, will actually cost the economy more than $400 billion over the next decade. So let's be clear, this was not an economic decision. Trump didn't have to do this. It's true, a bunch of Republican attorneys general spearheaded by the Attorney General of Texas. You know, Texas, the home of generous politicians who look out for those in need, such as Hurricane Sandy victims. The Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who filed a lawsuit against the Dreamers program. But Trump could have waited until the lawsuit was over, even if it went all the way to the Supreme Court. So what did Trump do? He passed the buck to Congress. And so Congress now, Paul Ryan and our friend, your friend, somebody's friend, Mitch McConnell. And he gave Congress 6 months to fix it by making the Dreamers legal. Now, House Speaker Paul Ryan has already come out against ending the program, but this Republican Congress hasn't exactly distinguished itself by its ability to get anything done, especially when it comes to helping people in need. Besides, Trump's arguments that Congress should handle this are not exactly credible from a Trump administration that has exercised such breathtakingly broad interpretations of a president's authority over immigration as to ban travel from 6 Muslim countries. Trump and the Republican Congress face a daunting array of very complicated issues right now in the next month. They've just come back today. Congress has just come back. In the next month, they've got to pass a budget, raise the debt ceiling. They also need to reauthorize programs like flood insurance and air traffic control and provide money for flood victims in Texas before they can turn to their top objective for the year, which is a major tax overhaul, meaning a big tax break for the rich and for corporations. Why, oh why, in the midst of all of this, was it necessary to take on this divisive issue of young people who came here into the United States as little children? It's not as if they pose a major problem for America. It's not as if anyone is clamoring to have this done. It's just like Trump's other actions. The ban on transgender people in the military. Now, why exactly would any halfway sane person, looking at all of the problems this nation faces today, conclude that transgender people in the military or young people who came here illegally as small children are among the nation's problems, big problems that demand a solution right now? All he is doing is sowing more division, playing to his base, his dwindling base. Or consider Trump's ban on Syrian refugees and reduction by half the total number of refugees admitted to the United States. Why is he doing this? Do you remember last spring when Trump bombed Syria following Bashar al-Assad, his use of chemical weapons on civilians? Here's what Trump was saying then.
Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack. No child of God should ever suffer.
Now, if Trump really wanted to help Syria's children, he'd open American borders to thousands of Syrian refugees. This is just like Trump's fake agonizing over his decision to end DACA. Oh, he said, I love children. I love those dreamers. They're just wonderful. And then what does he do? He says the program is over unless Congress can fix it. The refugee ban does little or nothing to protect Americans from terrorism. No terrorist act in the United States has been perpetrated by a Syrian or by anyone from the 6 nations whose citizens are now banned from traveling to the United States. You have higher odds of being struck by lightning than dying from an immigrant attack. Not only is it unnecessary, but the ban comes just when the world's experiencing the worst refugee crisis since World War II. Can we be clear? Our biggest challenges as a nation are, in no particular order: 1, the proliferation of nuclear warheads and missiles around the world. 2, most recently, the danger posed by North Korea. 2, climate change, as exemplified by ever larger, more destructive hurricanes and coastal flooding. 3, the undermining of our democracy through voter suppression, gerrymandering, and interference in our elections by foreign governments. And 4, widening inequality and the growing population of poor in America. What is Donald Trump doing about any of these huge problems? Now, you may think that there are other problems that are just as big. These are my nominees for the biggest challenges we face right now. What is he doing about these huge problems? He's doing just the opposite of what he should be doing. Instead of reducing our huge storehouses of nuclear warheads, he's increasing them. Instead of tackling climate change, he's taken the United States out of the Paris Accord on climate change, and he's turned the EPA into the Environmental Destruction Agency. Instead of protecting American democracy, he's encouraging more states to suppress votes, set up a trumped-up commission on voter fraud. He doesn't even want to know what Russia did in the U.S. election because it may come too close to his campaign. And as to widening inequality, his proposed tax plan will make the rich far richer, and his new budget comes down especially hard on the poor, imposing unprecedented cuts in low-income housing and job training, food assistance, legal services, help to distressed rural communities, nutrition for new mothers and their infants, funds to keep poor families warm, even Meals on Wheels. Trump is spending his political capital going after young people who came to America as infants or children, transgender people, refugees, and the poor, for absolutely no good reason except shoring up his dwindling base. And this, my friends, is nuts. My real fear is that Trump is being normalized. You hear it in the press, you hear it from other people. After 7.5 months of this, America is becoming so accustomed to his lies, his unhinged behavior, his unnecessary cruelty. It's as if we had a crazy uncle in the attic. But he's affecting real people and he's doing real harm. He's embarked on an orgy of cruelty with absolutely no justification except the political one that his dwindling base wants that. This is morally repugnant, and we ought to be saying it every chance we get. It violates every principle this nation has ever cherished. We have a moral responsibility to do everything in our legal power to stop it. Now, these next 6 months are going to be critical. We all have to stand up for these kids, these DACA kids who came here when they were infants. We need the courage to urge Congress to pass legislation that will give dreamers a pathway to citizenship so they can finally live without the fear of deportation. If we speak out, we can protect these kids from Trump's cruelty. Just look what happened when the American people spoke out against the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. Republicans control Congress and the White House, but we, the people, still have the power on all of these issues. We can't give up. It's up to us to stop this. And now time for your questions, which I have not read. And they will therefore get my top of the head, off the top of my head responses. Chris Brooks, how do you suggest us Democrats and progressives living in rural America reach out to Republicans in our region? Chris, for one thing, as I said before, a lot of Republicans actually come out exactly as a lot of Democrats and progressives do on a lot of these issues, like DACA. You know, 2/3 of Republicans say that these kids who came here when they were infants, very young children, they actually ought to have citizenship. A lot of rural people in America are facing exactly the same problems, whether they're called Democrats or Republicans or consider themselves conservatives or liberals. I mean, look at the opioid epidemic. Look at public health problems. Look at the Trump budget that cuts help for rural regions of this nation. Now, you know, I would suggest you get together. I mean, maybe you don't know many Republicans in a rural area, but if you don't, you're going to have friends of friends who do. There aren't that many people in many rural areas. All right, Sandra Huffman, what is the difference between Trump's executive order regarding the Muslim ban and Obama's executive order regarding DACA? Both have to do with immigration, yet Republicans say DACA was unconstitutional. Well, exactly right, Sandra. I mean, the point is, what Republicans are saying about Obama's DACA is that it's just a ridiculous overextension of executive authority. And that's completely inconsistent, obviously, with what Trump has done on the Muslim ban. I mean, I'm sorry. You know, it's a lot to ask Donald Trump to be consistent. It's a lot to ask his White House to avoid hypocrisy. But when they and he use arguments, on the one hand, for storing up and shoring up their base that they have absolutely rejected and criticized Obama about, I think we just have to call it as it is. It is hypocrisy. Am I being too harsh? What do you think? Maybe. I don't think I am. Candace Belanoff, what will the DACA repeal do to the United States' labor force? Well, that's a problem, Candace, especially in the area of southeast Texas and Louisiana. You're going to have huge amounts of construction that have to be done. There are not nearly enough people right now to do all of those construction jobs. They are going to have to be done by a lot of immigrants. I mean, if we got rid of all of the immigrants, including deported a lot of the people who are there illegally or unauthorized, the cleanup would be almost impossible. So we need these people. There's another reason why we need immigrants, and it ought to be obvious to all of us, but let me just say it anyway. Our population is getting older. I can speak from personal experience. Given that our population is getting older, the ratio of people who are now working to the people who are retired is getting worse and worse and worse. About 30 years ago, we had 5 workers for every retiree. We now have 2.5 workers for every retiree. And in the direction we're now going, in about 5 to 8 years, we're going to have 2 workers for every retiree. That's why we need immigrants. That's why we need immigration. The idea that there's just a fixed number of jobs to be split up between new immigrants and Americans who are born here is ludicrous. It's not true. Zelyana Jurek Sporkis. How did I pronounce that? Pretty well? Do you think Congress will take bipartisan action against eliminating DACA? Well, let's put it this way. If Republicans in Congress are paying attention to polls, even polls of Republicans, they will take action to reverse what Trump has done. But here's what worries me. They have a huge crowded agenda in front of themselves, number one. Number two, they have not shown themselves able to get together on almost anything. I mean, there's not much of a Republican Party, is there? There's just there are factions, there are competing tribal groups inside the Republican Party. Number three, kind of building on the first two, they don't have experience governing or taking governing responsibility. And so if they're left with a kind of deadline, like a 6-month deadline to take bipartisan action against eliminating DACA, I doubt it. Democrats are willing to do it, but when was the last time you remember Republicans taking bipartisan action? That's what worries me. That's why all of us need to put as much pressure as we can on all of these Republicans, not only about DACA, but about so many others of these issues. We didn't even talk. One of the things I really want to talk to you about, and we'll get to it tomorrow, is taxes. I mean, these tax bills that are being floated right now by Republicans in the House and the Senate and Donald Trump, are absolutely irresponsible. But one thing at a time. Barbara Irini, who oversees the management of federal money to help Houston recover from Hurricane Harvey. Barbara, it's supposed to be FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, but HUD has part of the responsibility because Housing and Urban Development has some funds for emergencies and for helping in rebuilding activities. It's basically goes to the states, however. So FEMA is where the action should be. The irony is that Trump's budget actually cuts FEMA, and much of what people in Texas and Louisiana need in terms of flood insurance and other help, it has to be reauthorized this month, in September, if it's going to be there. And the debt ceiling has got to be raised, and so many other things have to happen. You know, I suppose the silver lining on this is that with the hurricane, there is a lot of pressure on Republicans to move as quickly as possible, and there's also some pressure on them to get together and be bipartisan with Democrats. But here again, I wish I could be confident that Republicans were responsible, that they thought about the country and placed the interests of the country ahead of their party or their internecine squabbles. I cannot be that confident. But I want you to be upbeat. This is a tough time. As I've said before, Congress is now back. Donald Trump is up to his old tricks and immoral actions. We have to be very, very clear that we are going to stay as upbeat as we can, and we are not only going to stay upbeat, but we are going to mobilize and organize and stay energized for the fights ahead. Thanks very much, and we will see you tomorrow. I want to thank, wait a minute, before we go, I want to thank Sasha Lightman and Andrew Santana for their enormous help putting this together.